Welcome inside Appalachia. I'm Mason Adams. For nearly a century, the Kentucky Mountain Laurel Festival has staged a formal dance. Organizers rely on a manual that's been passed down for generations.
Because you know that those diagrams and that handwriting is of someone who took such pride in the Mountain Laurel Festival. And it's also so detailed that we can't mess it up today.
Also, abortion is illegal in most cases in Tennessee. So what happens after a birth? A photographer followed one mother for a year.
I spent hours listening to her on the phone with food stamps office, Social Security, all these different resources that were supposed to be there for her but weren't.
And new prisons are touted as a way to bring jobs to former coal communities. Not everybody agrees the trade-off is worth it. You'll hear these stories and more this week inside Appalachia.
Support for this program is brought to you by Solar Holler, helping West Virginia homeowners manage their energy costs through solar power. Details at solarholler.com. Support for this program is provided by the Thrasher Group, an architecture, engineering, and field services firm serving West Virginia clients and communities since 1983. More information at thethrashergroup.com.
The following is an Encore episode. Welcome inside Appalachia. I'm Mason Adams. Appalachia is home to a lot of festivals. In eastern Kentucky, the town of Pineville has the oldest festival on record in the state. It's called the Kentucky Mountain Laurel Festival, and it happens Memorial Day weekend. It's a 4-day celebration that culminates with an exquisite tradition, the Grand March, a traditional dance that's been passed down since the first festival in 1931. Folkways reporter Will Warren was born and raised in Pineville and grew up taking part in the festival. In 2023, he reported on the Grand March. We've asked him on to introduce it. Will, thanks for coming on Inside Appalachia.
Mason, thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here.
So what are some of your earliest memories around the Kentucky Mountain Laurel Festival?
You know, there's so many traditions, but one that I remember vividly was my parents were volunteers for the festival, so they always worked it, but I would have to go with them as a young child. And I remember they have this reflecting pond on the festival grounds in the state park, but in the pond, there's all these salamanders. And that's what I remember as a child, catching salamanders while my mom and dad were there working. But when I was a kindergartner, I was actually chosen to carry the crown for the queen. And then in first grade, I was in what they call the miniature court. So I carried the cape train behind the queen as she was walking down to accept the award for the Kentucky Mountain Laurel Queen that year.
And for me, whenever I'm carrying around my audio recorder, it just changes my relationship with everybody around me. How did it feel to report on your home community?
I don't currently live in Pineville anymore. I haven't lived there in a bit, but anytime I go back there, it feels like home. And so I still know a lot of people there. And so the people in the story that you're going to hear, I knew all the people going into it, but asking those questions, I almost wanted to answer as I was asking it because I knew some of the answers, but I knew that they would answer them in some unique and interesting ways. So it's always weird when you go what I consider back home and have to be on, like you said, on the other side of the microphone.
So now as an adult, you're more involved in the festival. As a director, what does that role mean to you?
Yeah, so as a director, I have a ceremonial title as an affiliate director. Even though I don't live in Pineville anymore, I can still be connected in some way. I'm still going to travel back and go to the festival, but being a director, I can be a little more involved, volunteer my time, attend meetings when I can. It just keeps me connected to something that I'm so passionate about, something that I feel like is not only important to the state of Kentucky, but also the community of Pineville. And to just be an affiliate director, to still be connected to something that I'm very proud of even to this day, that's kind of why it's important to me.
Let's listen to it.
The Grand March is actually the finale of the Kentucky Mountain Laurel Festival. Before the dance can take place, though, there's a crowning of a queen. And before that, there's an introduction of the queen candidates.
Miss Paige Smith.
As the candidates are announced, they each perform a curtsy. It's an elaborate 15-second greeting of Kentucky's governor, who comes to Pineville each year to crown the queen. I catch up with Paige Smith after she was crowned the 2023 queen of the Kentucky Mountain Laurel Festival.
I was definitely shocked. I did not think I was going to win. After being there the whole weekend and seeing how seriously they take it and how big of a tradition it is and how involved everyone gets in it, the fact that I was picked as the representative was a huge deal. I was so honored.
Paige is representing Southeast Community College. She's one of 18 candidates who came from Kentucky's colleges and universities to compete for the crown. She says she was impressed by the attention to detail at the ceremony.
The flower crown they gave me is handmade. The pearl crown I ended up getting, the lady hand makes them every year, and they're different every year. It's just the amount of tradition and planning that goes into that, it's ridiculous. I had no idea it was that grand of a thing.
Grand being the key word here, all leading up to the finale, the Grand March.
At this time, we'll start our beautiful festival tradition, 92 years, the Queen's Grand March.
The Mountain Laurel Festival Grand March is a 92-year-old tradition of couples dancing. It's a variation of a promenade. Phil Jameson is the author of Hoedowns, Reels, and Frolics, Roots and Branches of Southern Appalachian Dance.
The simplest form is promenading around the room and then up the center, and they split off. One couple goes one way, one goes the other, and they come up the center 4x4, and then 4 go one way, 4 go the other way, and come up the center 8x8.
Then they form a snake around the room to end with a human tunnel of candidates and their escorts that the queen shuffles through. Jameson says the Grand March is a type of dance that's descended from a formal ballroom dance called the Polonaise, originating in Poland as far back as the 16th century.
All the couples would be promenading around the room, showing off their fine clothes and dignified style, and that was the way that a lot of balls opened in Europe and then in this country too, well into the 1800s, where there's going to be a dance before they start dancing, say, cotillions and quadrilles, which would be square dances or other types of dances. They would start the evening with a grand march.
The Mountain Laurel Festival Grand March takes place in a gym that's been transformed with pink and green decorations. The queen and queen candidates are decked out in white ball gowns. And while these women and their escorts make it look easy, the Grand March is not just something that's thrown together.
Yeah, that's the truth, because there is a order and a correct order, and it is all a fine old machine.
That's Taylor Thomas. Taylor grew up with the festival. She's now on the committee that teaches the dance to the candidates and their escorts.
It sounds kind of hard if you go through the motions, talking about it, but once you're actually standing there and doing it, it all comes together pretty seamlessly.
Part of what makes the dance work so well is that there's actually a manual that's been passed down for generations with detailed notes of the dance. That manual is treasured by the festival organizers.
Because that those diagrams and that handwriting is of someone who took such pride in the Mount Laurel Festival. And it's also so detailed that we can't mess it up today.
That's Prudy Thomas. Prudy is a former queen candidate herself and Taylor's mom. She taught the Grand March for decades and has recently turned the reins over to her daughter, who has literally been a part of the dance since before she was born. Taylor's first dance happened when the festival organizers were in a pinch.
And they needed an extra couple. Somehow they had miscounted, and at the last minute, a very pregnant Prudy Thomas has to get up and perform the Grand March.
The Grand March is deeply rooted here in Pineville, but the dance is part of a living tradition that has evolved over time. Phil Jameson says the Grand March that made its way from Poland to America inspired other forms of dance, like the cakewalk, a pre-Civil War dance form originally performed by enslaved people on plantations. It started as a mockery of the Grand March. The dance would be performed at balls held by white people.
And then the black folks would parody that and mimic it back in their own dances and putting on ridiculous, airs and high-stepping stuff, which eventually evolved into the cakewalk, which was a way of black folks kind of spoofing the white folks, the way they were dancing, promenading with their heads held high. I think it's fascinating. This dance that goes way back to, 16th century in Poland has popped up a number of places in our culture.
Places like Pineville, Kentucky, at a festival dedicated to a flower that blooms in the spring. As with a lot of small towns in Appalachia, Pineville sees the Mountain Laurel Festival as more than a festival, though. It gives the town a sense of belonging, a sense of place.
I'm telling you, that little town, it sparkles that weekend. Everybody is out mowing grass and planting flowers, and just the high school kids are painting the corners of the streets with the Mount Laurel logo. It's a time of year that this area, we put our best foot forward, and we take pride in this little town of Pineville, Kentucky.
As soon as you can walk in Bell County, you know how to do a curtsy because of the Mountain Laurel Festival. So we get people from other states, all parts of Kentucky, to come to this little Memorial Day weekend celebration that people just want to come back and be a part of it. I don't know of any other thing in the world that would compare to something like this. It's like stepping back in time, and everybody needs to come experience it at least once.
With as much pride as the town takes in the festival, there's no doubt this year's candidates will be prepared and ready to perform the Grand March. For Inside Appalachia, I'm Will Warren in Pineville, Kentucky.
The 2024 Kentucky Mountain Laurel Festival kicks off May 23rd. That story is part of our Folkways reporting project, which covers arts and culture in the region. To see photos of last year's Grand March, visit our website, wvpublic.org. Residents of Wyoming County, West Virginia, say water in a local creek is toxic, and that their drinking water is making people sick. But it's unclear exactly why, and who's responsible for fixing the problem. State regulators say water from a nearby mining complex is flowing into the creek. The mine was operated by a company that went bankrupt, and now multiple parties, including one of West Virginia Governor Jim Justice's coal companies, are fighting over who's responsible in court. WVPB's Brianna Heaney has more.
In Pineville, West Virginia, a town of 500, residents filled up the front rows of the county courtroom. They came to hear the latest legal update on a battle some have been fighting for generations: securing clean water.
How come that if people is living like they're in a third world country, in the United States of America?
That's Bobby Keene, one of the many residents who attended the court proceeding. He and his wife Patsy have lived in their house for 20 years. They have never had clean drinking water. They say the only way they can drink the orange water that comes out of the faucet is by using it to make coffee. In the last year, Bobby Keene says the water quality has gotten worse, and he and his wife have had some stomach issues and rashes. Other residents have reported similar symptoms, and they're not sure what could be causing it. Keene says one thing is clear.
There's something that's getting in the water.
A year ago, down the street from the Keene's house, water started flowing out of the ground in the middle of a field, forming a pool. All that water led to a mold infestation in the property owner's house. The water had a rotten egg smell and white, stringy slime. Just below the surface of that pungent pool is an old mine, previously owned by the now defunct Pinnacle Mining Company. The state's Department of Environmental Protection tested the water and said that the results indicated that it had been polluted by the abandoned mine. Nicholas Zagri is a West Virginia University mountain hydrologist. He says holes like the one in Pineville are known as artesian wells. They naturally push water from the aquifers to the surface.
And so when you start mining the geologic layers, the below ground layers, you're fundamentally changing how water is going to flow through the earth.
Now, the pool of smelly, murky water has become a steady stream that flows into Indian Creek. The DEP ordered Pinnacle to remedy the situation. When Pinnacle failed to act, it took the company to court. There is one major problem here. Pinnacle Mining Company no longer legally exists. As part of its bankruptcy, the company's assets and liabilities were sold. But to whom?
That is $1 million question.
That's Matt Hepler, a scientist with Appalachian Voices. Court documents show Pinnacle was, at least in part, bought by Bluestone Mining Resources and is owned by Governor Jim Justice. However, Justice says Bluestone is not responsible.
You can't blame me on this one.
They can't even figure out, they're arguing who that new owner is.
That's Hepler again.
They're not even sure. They're just pointing fingers at each other.
In court, on April 4th, the presiding Judge Derek Swope demanded the companies figure out who is responsible by their next court date in May. Outside the courthouse, community members said they felt disappointed. Richard Altizer has been delivering water to some of the residents affected by the water crisis. He and others were hoping the courts would have ordered the companies Bluestone and Alpha to cease all operations until they fixed some of the problems associated with Pinnacle's abandoned mine.
If that judge would have ordered that mines and that gas well companies to shut down until that was fixed, they'd be out there tomorrow fixing it.
In their lawsuit, the DEP and the man whose house was flooded are asking for injunctive relief, which is to say they don't want money for damaged property or the health issues the water has caused. They only want what has been broken to be fixed. But residents are frustrated by what they say is over a year of inaction.
Now that the mines gets to operate, the gas wells keeps doing what they're doing, everything's hunky-dory with the poor people down here. And it's frustrating, but like I said, we still got legal rights we're going to take.
The community is considering a class action lawsuit. In the meantime, the question looms: is the water safe? Grace Denver is an expert on water and its connection to people's lives. She works at West Virginia University's Center for Resilient Communities. She affirms what residents have been saying about their everyday use of the water from contaminated wells.
That can result in huge GI issues, skin rashes. It can even lead to longer-term cancer and things like that.
Even though the DEP found the mine was the source of the contamination, it says the water quality passes all mine reclamation standards. But members of the community are skeptical. Terry Fletcher with the DEP says the agency is doing everything within its powers to take on the issue.
I know there's been kind of a narrative pushed out there that we're only testing for, 1 to 2, 3 to 4 things when we're testing for dozens and dozens of parameters.
But Hepler from Appalachian Voices says the tests that the department have done so far might not show the true water condition.
Now, when you test the water column, which is just to say test the water without any of that slime in it, the water has been coming back fine according to West Virginia DEP standards.
Hepler believes that the water does pass mine reclamation standards, as well as Clean Water Act standards. But he says that even still, that doesn't translate to the water being safe. And there is another set of data that is being ignored, says WVU's Grace Denver.
Community members are experts of their own lives, and so I think their lived experience of knowing, recognizing the smell, noticing the color change in their community, and recognizing also if any rashes are appearing or if they're feeling funky. Like, I think that is scientific knowledge. And I think that we should be taking these observations from the community a lot more seriously.
For Bobby Keene, whose faucet still has orange water coming out, he says he isn't angry at anyone. He just wants his family and his community to have access to safe water. For West Virginia Public Broadcasting, I'm Brianna Heaney in Charleston.
The trouble with the water in Indian Creek continues. In June, the West Virginia Department of Environmental Protection revoked the former Pinnacle mine permit, and the DEP took on the responsibility of cleaning up the site. Meanwhile, state regulators have approved a new mine expansion over objections from local residents. Coming up, abortion is all but banned in Tennessee. A photographer follows one family's harrowing year. You're inside Appalachia. I'm Mason Adams.
Support for WVPB is provided by the Huntington Museum of Art, presenting Joyful Spirits, Haitian art from the Winslow Anderson Collection through February 8, 2026. Details at hmoa.org.
In the 1960s, photographers visited parts of Appalachia to illustrate Lyndon Johnson's so-called war on poverty. They captured stark, black and white images of people living hard in distressed places. Those images are what we now call poverty porn, and they reinforced hillbilly stereotypes. That history accounts for why a lot of people here are still suspicious of photographers. Tennessee photographer Stacy Kranitz not only acknowledges that history, she actively wrestles with it in her work. Last year, Kranitz followed a young family in Tennessee for a story for ProPublica called The Year After a Denied Abortion. Stacy Kranitz, thank you so much for coming on Inside Appalachia today.
Oh, thanks for having me, Mason.
We're talking today because of a photo essay you had published in ProPublica. It's titled The Year After a Denied Abortion, but it's less about the abortion that didn't happen than about the year in the life of this mother and child and family, really, and the various challenges they encounter. So the story centers around Marin Michelle Hollis, who is the mother in question. And at the beginning of the story, she is having her fifth child. She's already been working through recovery. How did you connect with Marin, and how did you get such access to her life?
So I received a call from my visuals editor at ProPublica December of 2022, and she asked me if I would be available to follow a woman who is in the late stages of a life-threatening pregnancy that she has been forced to carry to term. The reporter, Kavita Sarana, this is her beat, this is her focus, is abortion across America. And she had been working really hard to find a story to tell from a very intimate first-person perspective. We didn't have full permission from Marin yet. We had set up a time to go and meet her to discuss what we would like to do and to see if it was something that she was interested in participating in. And then she gave birth the next day. She had a very intense birth. She almost died during the birth of her child. Her child, Elena, was born 3 months ahead of time and was in the NICU. Kavita and I went to meet her in the hospital. We had originally planned to meet her that day, and so we asked her if she was okay to meet with us, and she said yes. She was very adamant that she wanted to tell her story. She wanted other people to understand what she was going through, how she made the decisions that she made. It's a complicated story in that, they originally, her and her husband, Chris, they wanted to have the baby, but they had to really think through the risks, which was that she was very likely to die. And then that would leave her other child without a mother. And that child was not even one yet.
The story basically follows their life for the next year after their daughter, Elena, is born prematurely. we see them go through just excruciating experiences. It all feels very real and also very, very hard. And she's extraordinarily vulnerable in this. We see it at some of her lowest moments. How are you able to capture this year in this person's life in such a close way?
I did have to be constantly available, and I worked with Kavita, the reporter, and my editor, Andrea Weiss. Me and Kavita were in constant contact with Mayron. If she was going to a doctor's appointment, we definitely wanted to be there for that. If she was going to run errands, we wanted a chance to be there to do that, to document that, her work as well. And so she got in the habit of letting me know the kinds of things that were happening in her life each week.
How did you deal with this not as a photographer, but as a person? How were you able to compartmentalize the trauma going on in this person's life in such a way that you could carry on your own life at the same time?
One of the ways that I am able to do this, and this is a choice, is that I am a huge believer in there not being a dividing line between my personal life and my professional life. I have been bleeding these lines for a really long time. So that part didn't feel all that different. And I think it made me uniquely suited to do this work, to pick up at any moment and rush to Clarksville, which is about 2 hours, a little over 2 hours from where I live. I have to say, I've worked on a lot of really, really challenging stories. This one really took me down. It was incredibly intense, and I'm really grateful to my editor and Kavita for providing a lot of emotional support throughout the year.
As a journalist, it's tricky because our stories may end, but life goes on. And Chris and Mayron's story ends in a challenging moment with Elena's first birthday. Chris is trying to put together a celebration, and Mayron is in jail at the time. Can you give us an update on how that family is doing?
Unfortunately, things are difficult right now. I spoke with Mayron last a few days ago, and they are going through a lot of the same struggles. The story really affected a lot of people, and they went to Mayron's GoFundMe page, and they donated money at a time when a lot of their utilities were being shut off. They were going through another eviction warning. They owed their babysitter $1,000. The babysitter was kind enough to let them continue to bring the children there. But to be able to pay your childcare provider is such an important thing to be in control of.
What's some wisdom you've taken away from this experience?
Spending time with Mayron is a masterclass in resilience. Every time I left, after spending a few days or a week with her, I felt like I had a deeper appreciation and understanding for how to survive in the face of extreme difficulty. I spent hours listening to her on the phone with food stamps office, Social Security, all these different resources that were supposed to be there for her but weren't. I think a lot of people do not realize how inaccessible government assistance can be. And I really, really felt like that education will stay with me forever.
The photos in this story are emotionally raw and intense. But in a lot of ways, they align with the work you've been doing for the last 15 years almost in Appalachia and elsewhere. Did you set out as a young photographer to do this kind of work, or did you just kind of fall into it through your experiences?
I had always been a magazine photographer right out of studying photography as an undergraduate. I was doing a lot of work around subculture, around music and land and different kinds of sort of more, you could say, superficial stories. And I was also shooting a lot of portraits of C-list celebrities. And I worked for Guitar World and Revolver magazines. I shot a lot of metal bands, which was a true pleasure. But I had a bit of a crisis of faith in 2008, which is around the time the media industry collapsed. And it gave me an excuse to separate from this industry that I felt like only allowed me to make work for a couple of days. And so the stories were always living on the surface of an idea. And I really wanted them to live the idea. And so in 2009, I started several projects, and one of them was located in the Appalachian region of the United States. I began to really think a lot about intimacy and how I could use the camera to get as close to people as possible. And so it was around 2009 that I began to make this kind of, I guess you could say, more guttural work, living very closely with subjects, spending very long periods of time.
I wanted to ask you about photography's complicated relationship with Appalachia. Going back to, Stranger with a Camera, the documentary, and even before, gatekeepers have criticized your work for being exploitative because it is raw and guttural, I think was the word you used for it. What's that journey been like for you? I'm curious as to your thoughts about photography in Appalachia and how you authentically cover that area.
I came to make work in Appalachia because I was feeling frustrated with the concept of journalism, this fantasy of objectivity. And I felt like in order to talk about that, it would be best to do that in a place that had been harmed by photography, in particular photojournalism. Once I was there and I realized this was a place with a significant history of problematic photographic representation, it really piqued my interest because I was looking for a place that was struggling with its visual representation. So that's actually how I came to take pictures in the region. I was really interested in the idea of stereotypes. They're useful for us as humans, right? They help us understand and process what is good, what is bad, what is right, what is wrong. So I began to look at all these different stereotypes that existed in the region, snake handling churches. I went to a Klan rally, not unique to Appalachia, but certainly a part of rural American Southern life. And then I looked to undo those stereotypes, to look for images that kind of were its opposite. And of course, I found a lot of things out by me. There's this really incredible rural queer commune. Actually, there's several. And so I went there and took pictures as well. And so I was kind of looking to kind of play with the stereotypes. In some ways, I lean into them in order to start a conversation. What I guess I'm looking to do is to make work that asks us or asks the viewer to reflect on their own relationship to images of poverty. I think we talk a lot about poverty porn, but we don't talk a lot about how the threshold for what is poverty porn and what is not is going to be different for every single individual. So when we talk about things like this, it's really important to understand where we ourselves are coming from in determining that something is problematic or not. Where does that come from for that person? It definitely has to do with their own personal history with poverty. And that's a really important thing to factor in, to think about. And so I really am trying to make work in this region that does in many ways deconstruct that problem.
Do you have a sense of where your line is, of where that threshold is crossed? Or is it more like the Supreme Court Justice's definition of obscenity? You know it when you see it.
No. I think one of the things that has been most valuable for me is that I have learned in making my work that line is constantly shifting. I try to make work in this place that has been very harmed by photography, and I would never deny that truth, that allows us to talk about that discomfort, those problems, the shame that we feel around images of poverty, their inability to actually solve poverty. Appalachia is best served by a variety of photographic voices. All these different pieces of a puzzle that fit together to tell a story about this place. And they really all need to be in conversation with each other.
Stacy Kranitz, thank you so much for coming on and speaking with us on Inside Appalachia.
Thanks so much for having me. This was lovely.
Since our conversation, Kranitz and her team at ProPublica won a Pulitzer Prize for their reporting on abortion laws and maternal health. To find a link to her work, visit our website, wvpublic.org. Central Appalachia is home to 16 federal and state prisons. And the idea of building prisons in the region was based partly on the idea of replacing lost jobs in coal country. Some of them were even built on the site of former surface mines. Now, federal officials are considering adding a new prison in Letcher County, Kentucky. The area's U.S. Representative, Hal Rogers, firmly supports the project. But as the Kentucky Center for Investigative Reporting's Jared Bennett tells, the project is also drawing opposition, both from locals and from activists around the country.
Umar Muhammad traveled to Letcher County for the Bureau of Prisons meeting along with 10 other people from Washington, D.C. Looking out the van window over the mountains of eastern Kentucky brought back some anxiety.
Last time when I rode through these neck of the woods, I was in handcuffs and shackles.
Muhammad spent 30 years in the federal prison system, some of that time in rural prisons in Kentucky and West Virginia. Now he's part of a new advocacy group called Building Community, Not Prisons. They came to Kentucky to help local activists make their case against the new prison in Letcher County.
So now I'm riding through the same dusty roads, if you will, free.
Congressman Hal Rogers has been allocating money to build prisons here in eastern Kentucky for the last 4 decades, promising jobs and economic revitalization along with them. But some people are skeptical. Rogers' district remains one of the poorest in the country. We reached out to Rogers, but his office didn't respond to requests for comment.
Good evening and welcome to tonight's public meeting concerning the proposed development of a federal correctional institution and federal prison camp in Letcher County, Kentucky.
The Bureau of Prisons said 150 people attended the meeting online or in person at the cafeteria of Letcher County Central High School. Elwood Cornett was first up to the mic to support the prison. He's a retired educator and preacher who chairs the Letcher County Planning Commission, a nonprofit tasked with bringing jobs to the county.
This project will provide a few hundred jobs. The coal industry has been pretty well destroyed, but these are good jobs.
But Amelia Kirby, who once owned a popular bar in Letcher County and now works as a local community activist, pointed out that the Bureau of Prisons' own documents say very few of the jobs required to run the prison would go to local citizens. When Kirby stepped up to the mic, she came with those documents in hand.
Quote, only a small portion of the permanent workforce needed to operate the FCI is expected to be filled by current Letcher County residents.
According to those Bureau of Prison documents, there are already 3 federal prisons in the area with 90 current job openings. Kirby said those prisons didn't help the counties where they were built.
Their total employment has continued to fall since the prisons opened. The populations have dropped, and they continue to have among the highest poverty rates in the country. Opening a prison didn't solve their problems, it made them worse.
Gwen Johnson, who owns a bakery in town and hires recently incarcerated people, echoed other locals in wanting something better for Letcher County.
And I personally am insulted that this is what is being offered to our hard-working people. Is this all you got? I mean, really?
When it came time for Muhammad to speak, he talked about his time behind bars and the sacrifices his wife had to make to visit him in rural prisons hours away from home. Muhammad said she endured racism and a humiliating strip search.
Don't let your community be known as just another prison county where they torture our human souls at.
By meeting's end, 42 people spoke, with 20 people supporting the prison and 22 people against it.
Since that story aired, it's less clear whether officials will ever break ground on the prison in Letcher County. In January, an indigenous woman-led group called the Appalachia Rekindling Project purchased 63 acres within the land designated for the prison. And in June, the U.S. Department of Justice issued a budget request to rescind or claw back $500 million for their proposed prison. For incarcerated people, books can provide crucial information to navigate the justice system, educate themselves, and develop plans to re-enter society. But people in prison have limited access to books. The Appalachian Prison Book Project is trying to change that. WVPB's Jack Walker reports.
Each week, volunteers comb through a stack of more than 200 letters in downtown Morgantown. These letters come from people incarcerated across Appalachia, most of whom have the same request: something new to read. Many prisons across the United States have libraries, but they tend to have narrow inventories and limited hours of operation. Today, more than 50 groups across the United States and Canada mail incarcerated people books missing from their library shelves. But this can be tricky. Books with divisive or controversial content, like violence and nudity, tend to be rejected outright by facility staff. Other rules are subjective, changing from facility to facility.
These rules are not set in stone. They're usually very generic, and it's up to the discretion of whoever's working in the mailroom or whatever prison system it is to decide if a book gets inside.
Lydia Welker is the communications coordinator for the Appalachian Prison Book Project, or APBP. People who are incarcerated in Tennessee, Kentucky, Virginia, West Virginia, Maryland, and Ohio can write APBP letters requesting specific titles. APBP then examines each prison's policies and finds a way to connect readers with whichever books possible.
So when we receive a letter from someone, it usually will include a genre they're interested in reading, or an author, or maybe even a specific title. And so on our end, we collect donated books and we organize them on our shelves, and our volunteers will come in and they will read the letter. They will look through our shelves of books to try to find the best possible match for that letter. And then we'll wrap it up and we'll get it in the mail to that incarcerated person.
Welker said the most common request is a dictionary. Other widely requested texts include textbooks and books containing medical and legal information. For Welker, this only further exemplifies the gaps in educational resources available to people who are incarcerated. Volunteers join the project from all different backgrounds. Some are advocates for prison reform. Others, like Morgantown High School student Lily Staples, do it from a love of books and a desire to expand reading access nationwide.
It's a really nice space for volunteer hours, but for someone, I've always loved to read, and so giving other people that chance in their position really means something to me.
Still, books occasionally get rejected and returned to APBP. Welker said one prison even refused to take in a copy of The Lord of the Rings because it had illustrations of a fictional map. Volunteers keep a running list of which books get accepted and which don't, so that they don't waste resources.
At least what APBP does is we have someone on our team whose role it is to outreach to prisons and to constantly get in touch with them and make sure we have their most updated rules about what can be allowed in and inside.
Welker said this work has proven particularly crucial because of mass incarceration in the United States.
The United States itself has incredibly high incarceration rates, especially compared to other countries in North America, Western Europe, things like that.
In 2022, the U.S. Bureau of Justice Statistics reported that 355 of every 100,000 U.S. residents were incarcerated. That's one of the highest rates globally. Plus, the incarceration rate of Black residents is nearly 5 times higher than that of white residents. Without groups like APBP, thousands of residents and a disproportionate number of Black residents would lack access to reading resources. For others involved with APBP, engaging with the U.S. prison system has been eye-opening. Prison outreach coordinator Danielle Stoneberg said contacting prisons for the project has required her to think critically about how the system impacts people on the inside.
As I started to have these experiences of going inside and reading letters, and also just having conversations with people where I start to realize that I have a lot more friends than I thought of who had loved ones who've been impacted by the system, or I've had a lot more loved ones of my own who have been impacted by the system that I just didn't know. It really kind of struck me how close to home it was.
Stoneberg said APBP isn't just about helping others read. It's also about understanding the prison system and uplifting people who need support. Now, she's encouraging other people to get involved too.
Many of us who work here with APBP, we believe that individuals shouldn't be judged for, the mistake that they made. We wouldn't want to be judged for the worst thing that we ever did. And we believe in the humanity of people who are incarcerated. And so I think that's what I would tell people is go ahead and have these experiences and see if that makes you believe in the humanity of people who are incarcerated.
Since APBP was founded in 2004, Welker said the organization has successfully distributed more than 70,000 books across the region. With 2 decades of experience under their belt and a team of dedicated volunteers, APBP organizers hope that number will only continue to grow in the years ahead. For Inside Appalachia, I'm Jack Walker in Shepherdstown.
Reporter Chris Schultz contributed to that story. In her new book, Burn, poet Sarah Henning draws on her complicated family history and rough upbringing. The book considers young love, loss, and the weight of grief. Producer Bill Lynch spoke with Henning about her background and what drew her to poetry.
Sarah, thanks for talking with us. Tell us a little about your background.
So while I wasn't born in sort of that Appalachian adjacent region, I was born in Savannah, Georgia. But almost immediately, when I was 4 years old, Mom moved back with her parents after my father passed away. And so I was raised in Athens, Georgia. My grandfather was a professor at the university, but we were not well off. My mother, while she did earn a bachelor's in social work, she worked a lot of sort of lower paying jobs. And so there was definitely that financial exigence to sort of move back to where her parents were. It was an alcoholic home. There were systemic issues related to poverty. I don't recall Mom ever making more than $20,000 a year growing up. And so watching her do that as a single parent was really inspiring, awakening to me. I saw her struggle for us, and it taught me a lot about what family meant and what love meant.
When and where were you exposed to poetry, and what was your relationship with it?
I kind of thought of it as it was my escape. Like I said, I grew up in less than, we'll call it less than ideal circumstances. And I always turned to literature. I always turned to sort of poetry as something that felt like I could read and that I could do, that I felt like it could take me away sort of from my world, or if it couldn't take me away from my world, it could help me to understand better some of the circumstances that helped me to understand humankind and sort of the vast ways that sort of manifested. Let me make that clear. Let me take that down a notch and say, I was a science major. My mother told me she wanted a daughter who became a doctor because doctors made money and she didn't want me relying on a man. And so for her, the idea of choosing a profession was very much monetarily driven. So my compromise was that I was going to major in English and genetics and have that strong pre-med focus. Eventually, I did drop the pre-med, which made her very angry at me. And I don't think she ever did forgive me about that. And so for me, as someone who's always been interested in philosophy and looking for meaning, perhaps outside of a biological system, poetry was a place for me to explore that. I've always loved poetry. I was drawn to it when I took my first, creative writing class as an undergraduate that I took for fun. I don't know. For me, it's been really a saving grace.
People they love to talk about themselves, and they also hate to talk about themselves. Revealing, personal truths and kind of diving into your history. Did it get easier as it went?
I feel like for me, after my mother died, the last thing I wanted to write was about my mother. I wanted to read about people's experiences with their mom. I wanted to read Wild, or I wanted to read The Long Goodbye. I wanted to read these other people who were willing to really engage on that level. And I think for me, the less I tried to sort of write about those difficult things, the more I recognized that no matter if I tried not to write about them, they would end up in my writing anyway. And so I told myself, well, what happens if you just tell the story? Can you contribute toward this canon of literature about survivorship, about sort of, bearing witness to difficult things in a world where we are at war and we are watching horrible things? I mean, to talk about, one person's struggle in a family, in no way is that ever to be equated with these larger issues. But I do think that I published my last book, Terra Incognita, which was an elegy for my mother, it came out during the pandemic. And a lot of people who had been losing people, close to them, they did come to me and they said, thank you for writing so frankly about grief. I want to sort of put it out there that I think writing poetry is very different than therapy. I don't think it's fair to say that writing about those sorts of things is therapeutic. I mean, it can be, but I like to think of it as you're taking a story and then you're turning it into art. If I can take a story and turn it into art, then maybe I can do for others what they would do for me, which was I would turn to a piece of literature to feel less alone.
Would you like to read something?
Oh, absolutely. And this is the one, and I think about as we all get a little bit older, if we've learned things about our lives, if sort of we've burned in time's fire, what do we learn from that? I like to think of, if you're thinking about the agony, you're thinking about the ecstasy, you're thinking about, if you're choosing to just kind of let yourself burn in the fire, or are you going to be this phoenix that kind of rises up and is reborn through that? So this is the final poem in the book. It's what it's named for, and it's called Burn. If middle age has a shape, it would be the body singing, word by luscious word. My body's glory clot in my lungs. If I could, I would uncry myself, send my body back to my mother's womb, where my father once signed his name in blood. I hung there, seam of cells, fixed to my holy order, love's microscopic blaze so much like breathing. My heart still twined to my mother's. Her body, it held me like she hadn't given up. I longed to be pulled from my mother some August long ago and lie on her chest, naked, cord uncut, hair matted to my skull. I want to fill again the hollow in my mother death will not take as its house. Teach me, body, to unscar what is scarred, to cherish the uncharitable, my breasts whipped philosophers, my eyes a murder of crows, my thighs are engines, leave traces of fire as I rise up. Watch me rise up.
The book is Burn, poems by Sarah Henning. Sarah, thank you very much.
Oh, of course. My gosh, this was such a pleasure. And I feel like, there's been lots to talk about today, but I'm so grateful to have had a chance to chat a little bit about my new book with you.
Sarah Henning teaches creative writing at Marshall University. Burn is available from Southern Illinois University Press. Till next time, thanks for joining us as we journey throughout Appalachia. Our theme music is by Matt Jackford. Other music this week was provided by Hello June, John Ingram, Jeff Ellis, Eric Vincent Huey, and John Blissard. Bill Lynch is our producer. Sandra Alloy is our associate producer. Our executive producer is Eric Douglas. Kelly Libby is our editor. Our audio mixer is Patrick Stevens. You can find us on Instagram and Twitter @InAppalachia. You can also send us an email to insideappalachia@wvpublic.org. Visit wvpublic.org/InsideAppalachia to subscribe or stream all of our stories. Or look for Inside Appalachia on your favorite podcast app. Inside Appalachia is a production of West Virginia Public Broadcasting.